Hi, Ed. How are you doing?
Ian, I'm doing well.
Excellent, excellent. So we are the day after the 2025 April election. You were involved in the town treasurer debate. Debate. We had a debate.
We did.
Town treasurer race, which was the most sought after for this election cycle. Tell us about it. Were you excited?
It was an experience. Definitely. I love campaigning. Campaigning allows you the opportunity to speak with folks, and have a lot of conversations that just over the course of your work in elected office, you don't always get the opportunity. And campaigning literally brings you to people's front doors. I knocked on hundreds upon hundreds of doors and spoke to a lot of folks and had a lot of really good conversations. And it doesn't get more local than that. A lot of common themes for folks, a lot of common concerns for folks, and it's really meaningful time spent, and it's some of the best time that I have as a part of this political world, if you will, being able to speak with constituents, and that's exactly what you're doing when you're campaigning. So I don't want to say it forces you, because you don't have to do these things, but it motivates you to want to get out there and make sure that your messaging is being heard, make sure that your messaging is on point with the needs of the people you're looking to serve. And I really enjoy that.
Excellent, excellent. So you are, of course, well-versed in town politics in Wakefield. Tell us about this job. How is this different from the other ones that you've held?
Sure. It is very different.
Yeah.
At its core, the town treasurer role is an operational one. You are running a department, and a very important department at that. A lot of folks before this race didn't even really realize what the town treasurer did.
Yeah, I know when we did the debate, we were all like, okay, so what do we ask for questions?
Right.
Nobody knew.
Who is this person? What does this mystery person do?
Exactly.
It sounds it sounds like an important role, but no one really probably much knew. And so I at its core, as I said, it's an operational role, and it's making sure that you have the town's assets, i.e. the dollars, i.e. the tax dollars, really, where they need to be when they need to be there. And I was sworn in today at the town clerk's office. Spoke with the team over at 5 Common, where the town treasurer's department is. And we talked about immediately, some of the issues, like making sure that the payroll was funded for this week. So everyone got across town and school department, so they got their paychecks. It's things like that. I made sure that the money were transferred where they needed to be for that. And we have a very capable, very talented team in the town treasurer's office. And I'm very confident that we'll continue to have just a high level of excellence and performance, and I'm honored to be a part of that team, because these are really talented folks, and there's a lot of important work that's done. But ultimately, the buck stops with the town treasurer on a lot of different things that you're doing. As I said, making sure that, in essence, the town treasurer is holding the checkbook, and so you need to make sure that all those checks are going to clear, and you need to make sure that you have the money where it needs to be. But the town treasurer also spends a lot of time making sure that we are maintaining our stellar AAA bond rating. Any borrowing, and we're doing a lot of that now. You're talking about bonding and projects, and the high school alone, $100 million still left to borrow. The town treasurer is an integral part of that process and those discussions, and we're heading into an interesting period for our community.
And in view of all of that, how is our community looking? I mean, I know this is literally the first day on the job, but to your eye, from what you've seen, the little bit you've seen so far today, how does the town look?
Well, I bring to this the past 11 years of having worked within our financial system, if you will. You know, our budgeting processes, in both in terms of operational budgets on an annual basis, but also looking at our capital expenditures, and focusing a lot on our forecasting. And so I could probably answer that question very similar yesterday than as compared with today, because I have that background and understanding. But I think we're at a really critical point in our community. We have enjoyed some really solid leadership, and I think a lot of that goes to our town administrator, Steve Mayo, who's done an excellent job for us. We have been fortunate. We have balanced budgets for the last 11 budgets that I've been a part of. We've balanced all of those. We have, healthy reserves. We are funding our retirement, or what our OPEB benefits. For those are the benefits that we provide to employees post-employment, and we've done well, especially in comparison to a lot of our other communities. But at the same time, we're facing a lot of challenges, especially as far as state aid is concerned, and that has been rather dismal. The projections are rather dismal, and I was having a conversation earlier today relative to this, and fiscal year 2026, so that begins on July 1st of 25 and goes until June 30th. I think we're going to be solid there. Fiscal year 27, which begins July 1st of 2026, is really the first time that, if projections hold, we're going to be looking at a deficit if we continue spending at this rate, because spending will outpace revenue, and that's a challenge. And that's just the first year where a deficit is forecast, and then it gets worse thereafter, fiscal 28, 29, and 30. Nearly exponentially from 27, 28, and then 29 to 30, it goes up, but we're talking millions of dollars ultimately. So that's a warning for us that we have to really rethink how we're directing, how we're prioritizing our budgets and spending within those budgets. And as you may know, Ian, on the town council, I was always a big fan of zero-based budgeting. So I would encourage departments to start at zero and then work your way up to build your budget to see, okay, where are the needs, and then how do you justify that spending. I think that's going to be an important practice going forward, because if we don't have responsible, sustainable budgeting, we're going to be in deficit territory. And if you end up in deficit territory, you have two options. You either make a lot of cuts, and that often will mean layoffs. And in a budget like ours, that would probably mean school layoffs and more likely teachers. Or you go to the community and you seek override votes. And we just saw that in Stoneham.
We did.
A $14 million override just to meet their operational budget. And it was defeated. And if that gets defeated at the polls, then the question becomes, how do you balance your budget? Because you have to. And that means you have to cut your spending. And in that case, Stoneham is having to face a lot of really difficult choices as a result of that. I don't want to see Wakefield in that position. And I'll say that, we're in a lot of ways, I think we've been stronger financial decision makers with some better forecasting in place. But when you have forecasting, you also have to rely upon it. And we see where we are now, and our modeling has gotten us to this point, but we have to rely on that same modeling on a go-forward basis. And so if it's served us well to this point, we can't begin to just disregard it now because we don't like what it's showing us. But it's a warning to all of us, and I think it's a call to action to make sure that we think more deliberately about how we spend going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as we know, a lot of communities surrounding us and even further out are all having similar issues like this, where they're having to decide between one or the other, or cuts or overrides, and we feel for everybody who's in this position. Now, you obviously know some things that we need to start looking at, but what were some of the things that, as you were campaigning, that people were talking about that was really concerning to them?
I think one thing that really stood out to me, and it's not directly on point with town treasurer, but the phrase I heard more than any other when I would speak with folks was common sense. And one of the biggest challenges that I had in this campaign was explaining to folks why it is that their vote for me for treasurer would benefit them more than my wrapping up my term as a town councilor. And they said, we need more common sense on the town council. And I was really humbled by how many folks were saying, you know, we appreciate all the work you've done. You're sensible, you're level-headed, but they kept saying we need common sense, and you bring common sense. So I think one of the challenges we face as a community is to make sure that we have a town council that has that that common sense, and I hope that proves to be the case. I want to be able to bring that same level of common sense to this role now because it matters. To your question about what the concerns are specifically, I think it's the uncertainty of knowing what their tax bills are going to be, and that's a big issue. I've spoken to too many people now, many of whom are seniors on fixed incomes, but not just seniors on fixed incomes, because fixed incomes aren't only the things of those over age 65. There are a lot of young families, single folks, couples with no children, who have their budgets, right? And so maybe they have a mortgage or a rent payment that they know is going to be every month, and they really kind of budget their life around that with certain expectations. And for most folks, you might get a cost of living adjustment from your employment, and that's your main source of income. But
and even those don't really are few and far between nowadays.
Indeed, but if they are, they're likely not keep up with inflation, or certainly other costs that are going at a much higher clip.
Food, gasoline,
all of that,
heating, all of that stuff it just adds to this difficulty.
It does, and then you have this uncertainty of what your tax bill is going to be. And that's a real challenge for folks. And so for some people, they literally just in real dollars are saying, I cannot afford this. And so you have people that are in their 70s or even early 80s. I was speaking with a woman yesterday in her early 80s saying, I don't know how I'm going to be able to continue to live in my home where I've lived for the last, in her case, 55 years. That is unconscionable to think about that. And so how do we solve for that? Because that is one of the biggest concerns I have. Well, the answer isn't we tax more or we have, in essence, overrides, which really function as special assessments on people, because that creates a tremendous level of unpredictability. What does someone do? How do you pay that expense? How do you make ends meet? There's already a lot of tough choices that are being made in a lot of households here across our town. And not having the certainty of knowing what your tax bill is going to be just adds to that. Now we know what the high school is going to add to our tax bills. That was something that was voted on by a majority of folks here within town. It's a project that's going forward, and we know what the costs are projected to be relative to that. Where the treasurer can come in is from a borrowing perspective, trying to make sure that it's a big nut to crack. It's the largest expenditure in our town's history. It's a $273 million project, $208 million, though, of which is the responsibility of the local the municipality, the local taxpayer. So we know that's in the offing. We're borrowing only as needed. So we're not going to borrow the full $208 million now, bank it, and then pay the interest on that. So if you distill it down to how you would in your own personal financial situation, you borrow as you need it, and that's what we're doing. So we've borrowed about 108 million so far. We've got 100 million to go, thereabouts. Making sure that we're able to borrow at the most favorable rates possible is one way that we can try to help mitigate the financial impact of that. So that's what I'm focused on. I know I had a very long conversation with Steve Mayo, our outgoing town administrator, about this specifically today. What we can do to make sure that we find the most favorable rates, because if we're borrowing at a rate higher than we need to or higher than is available, that's costing taxpayers money. And orders of magnitude here, we're talking about $100 million just for the high school. That millions of dollars more in borrowing costs, many millions of dollars more for nothing. So I think that's one way that the treasurer can be an integral part in trying to keep things better reined in and under control. Of course, to support the project being done on time and on budget, right? Ideally, on time and under budget as a treasurer, that's what you're looking for. And if we can do that, all the better. When you look at places like Melrose, they have overrides that come up. Stoneham, they just finished their High school, I think this is their first academic year there.
Mm.
They had a lot of issues opening up, some costs, that weren't expected.
Yeah, they had a lot of bad timing.
A lot of bad timing with inflation, especially relative
Yeah.
to that. But I think that's part of why they find themselves in the position they do now. I don't want to see Wakefield having, a similar position. And I am concerned because we've been very proactive in terms of squirreling away, I'll call it, or saving for things like our OPEB obligation, which is about $100 million. That's, again, that's the retirement and the like for the former employees. We're at about 36 million, so therefore about 36% of that. In recent years, we had been trying to save or budget $1 million, I'll say, to put away towards that, to pay towards that obligation. This year, we had to cut that in half, or down to 500,000. That pushes out the date that we will have fulfilled that obligation. Now, don't get me wrong, we're better than most communities, and candidly, we're better than the state as a whole relative to that. But it's a form of kicking the can down the road, and that concerns me because that's just delaying an issue and making it an issue for tomorrow.
Which might be bumping up to tomorrow's issue.
When I'm looking at tomorrow's issue, we're talking about a new DPW facility, which is very much under consideration and will need to happen.
Yep.
Will that happen on the Han Street somewhere else? We don't know, but
Yep.
the North Ave facility is going to have to be addressed, and I think it's most likely it will not end up continuing to be on that site. We have that. There's been a lot of discussion relative to the fire department, ladder trucks, pumper trucks.
Yep.
As you well know, Ian, from watching the town council meetings, we're talking like a 3-year wait for these once you
Yeah.
place your order. And we're talking millions of dollars
Yes.
in capital expenditures. Absolutely critical that we do it because it's for public safety.
Yeah.
But there are costs with that. And so it's not just the high school, although the high school is certainly something that is easy to focus on now, but we have a lot of other significant capital expenditures, and that's not even including what we may need to do relative to improvements within the schools. And, Greenwood School had a new roof on recently. There's still some other improvements we can do to that facility and need to do to that facility, as well
yeah.
as some of the other schools as well. I think
Yeah.
Walton's in pretty good shape,
Yep.
obviously, but some of the others and we have a lot of deferred maintenance issues across town, not just the schools, but
Yeah.
across town, and
Yeah.
we need to focus on this.
Yeah.
And when times get lean, it's easier to kick those non-essential projects out, but then they become essential and become more costly. And we saw that with the roads. A lot of folks talk about the roads.
Yes, I think one gentleman was mentioning that there's been a pothole in his road since the 1980s.
Yes, and that's been a lot. That was a lot of my focus on town council, and I recognize that involves borrowing. We at town meeting, the participants at town meeting voted in favor of that. So we've borrowed millions.
Yep.
Relative to roads, and those are important expenditures. But part of the challenge is when you are having to basically dig up a road and start a new curb to curb. It's far more expensive than when you can maintain a system of roads
Yeah.
in better repair versus significant disrepair.
Well, you saw that recently with the connection for National Grid,
Absolutely.
where what was it, 3 or 5 miles worth of roads was all dug up, and of course when you dig that up, it might as well do everything else that's involved in it, and it was, what, a 3-year project, I think?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and it,
Good, needed to be done.
We
but-
did, and and when the mandates from the town was curb to curb for that, which is the best way you can pave roads. But so I've worked a lot with DPW on that issue. Obviously, I was a supporter of getting that before town meeting so we could prove, because we have about 87, 88 miles of road across town. At the pace we had been going prior to that, we were only doing about a mile of road a year, if you think about that. Now we have the capacity to do at least 6 per year, 6 miles of road per year. Now, it doesn't sound like a lot, but when you think about it, it's still under 10%, but that's on an annual basis.
Yeah.
And once we start to improve those roads, once we start to get a better baseline, then going forward, it's going to end up costing us less. And
Right.
so some of these are investments, but when you look at the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, for instance, those were times where, for a long while, we didn't have the financial wherewithal, understandably so, to be able to do this.
Yeah.
But these are projects that were delayed as a result. Similarly, a lot of, our reserves, or just a lot of capital projects were put on hold, and we've kind of unburied ourselves to some extent from that.
Mhm.
But more, we're a living community, and
Yeah.
things deteriorate, things change over time, and we have to stay on top of it as best we can. But that often involves borrowing. That's where the treasurer comes in.
Right, right, exactly. So, a lot of things to look at, a lot of things to deal with going forward, and we're having a lot of change in general, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, you're moving into this position, and Steve will be finally retiring, and I'm sure his wife is very happy about that.
I think Steve might be very happy about that by the
Yeah,
end.
I'm
Yes,
sure he is. I'm
yes.
sure he is.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, there were a couple of other changes in other
What-
boards and committees and school committee and town council. So a lot of changes happening.
Indeed.
Do you think it's going to develop some nice unexpected things?
I do. There's always a balance, right? You want change is not a bad thing, but smart change is an important thing. And I think in what you've just described, we're talking about losing our town administrator, our longtime town accountant in Kevin Gill, who has served us
Oh, yeah, I
very
forgot
well.
about Kevin, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And obviously my predecessor, the town treasurer,
Right.
combined, I think they have something like over 60 years of experience.
Got to be close, too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's our senior financial leadership team, municipal
Yeah.
finance team, and you take all of them out of the mix. Again, my predecessor, is now retired from this role. Steve Mayo, it's July 3rd
Yeah.
will be his last day, and Kevin Gill has indicated, within the next year,
Yeah.
he expects, based on what he's told town council previously. And so you lose that. And that concerns me, because when we're talking about, okay, what is our, really the equivalent of a credit score, like when we have a AAA bond rating,
Yep.
and that's like having like a person like an 800 credit score.
Yeah.
It's
I
really
remember there was a
desirable.
town council meeting where you discussed this, that it wasn't just the fact that the town borrows and pays back, but it's also everything else added to the mix, even down to the personnel in place, right?
Hugely important, and so there's so many different factors, and it's kind of a moving target. It's almost like that game of whack-a-mole where they might say, okay, well, here's a priority. Where are you with this and that? Where are your reserves? Where and the like. But I think almost universally, one of the biggest considerations is, okay, what's the financial leadership team in place?
Mhm.
What's their background? What's their familiarity with the town? And what has been their experience relative
Mhm.
to managing the town? Because when you go to Wall Street, you want to say you want to promote Wakefield as, hey, this is a community that pays its bills, that knows how to run. It's a well-run machine. This is a good investment.
Yeah.
And in our case, when you pull out three key players of that senior financial leadership team, it becomes a challenge. And I'm hoping to really fill that slot in that I can speak to the more recent lived experience of the last 11 budget cycles. I started on finance committee. I spent 3 terms on a town council, so I've been through that process. I also was chair of the public safety building reassessment committee. So we did a lot in that. So from a capital perspective, that was something that we spent a lot of time on,
Yep.
working, and we got that facility built, and,
Yeah.
and we're a better community for it. And so I think, and obviously I've worked on the downtown revitalization project since
Mhm.
about 2018 or 19,
Yeah.
and we've secured a lot of funding relative to that and commitments from the state on that. So that's going to be a transformative project. We already saw it on Albion Street, downtown, and we'll see it Middle Main in the next few fiscal years. But I think it's important that anyone looking at Wakefield understands that while we have a lot of change, we have a lot of opportunity, and
Yeah.
the opportunity here is for me to be able to slot into a critical role at a time where it's going to matter, to make sure that I can reassure folks that there's a steady hand that continues to be at the helm as a part of a team. And that's really what I see myself as bringing to this position more than anything. I recognize the magnitude of the time that we're living in as a community,
Yep.
and I'm ready to step up to that challenge because it's going to be important. The other piece of that too is when they're looking at how a community is a community's health, they're looking at the budgeting practices,
Right.
and they want to see that you're being conservative in the way that you're budgeting, that you're not budgeting beyond your means. Overrides to cover operational budgets are a demonstration of not budgeting properly,
Right.
because you're spending beyond your means. It's like charging up your credit card, only paying the minimum and letting all that all the interest accrue on that.
Yeah.
Like it's not the right way to budget.
No.
And so I think that part of what I want to make sure I'm able to convey going forward, working obviously with long range forecasting, folks, is making sure that all the folks at the table, be it school committee members, be it department heads, be it the town council, and of course FinCom, that we're all on the same page with this. We understand where we stand, where we are as a community, but also where we're going.
Yeah.
And so when each department, school being obviously the largest of them, when you're looking at this, how do you deliver the quality education or the quality services, as the case might be in a different department, that our taxpayers and residents deserve, while also making sure that we're living within our means. And that's something that I think is important. And I think the town treasurer has the ability to really run point more on that, be more of a quarterback in terms of just getting the information out there to folks. Town treasurer in and of him or herself isn't making these decisions, but town treasurer is in a position to be able to have that flow of information going to all the decision makers.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so you've got your experience, and thankfully we've had a town accountant replacement. I sadly forget her name, but
Liz, yes.
Liz. But
I
I'm
actually met with Liz today, and
Yep.
to your point on change, I was talking with Liz about ways in which we can streamline and I'll say modernize the way that we do a lot of things within our respective departments.
Yeah.
And there's in accounting especially, there's still a lot of paper. And Liz is not a big fan of paper,
No.
Nor am I. And so the idea that we're able to be able to streamline things by making things, by having things in the cloud, having things more electronic, so that when you're going to pull information, it's not from a printout that you had a day ago.
Right.
It's in real time.
Right.
And she and I were saying how we'll be meeting actually in the coming days, and we're talking about how we can collaborate on that, because that's a really important piece. Accounting and treasury serve different functions, a lot of overlap between. We serve as a check and balance, but when you have paper that's going from point A to point B to point C, then back to point B, or then back to point A, whatever the case might be, there's a lot of opportunity for error, mistake, oversight, information getting lost in translation. So I'm really excited about that change, if you will. And our accounting department, don't get me wrong, has done a great job.
Yeah.
But the idea of just revisiting practices and having a fresh set of eyes, saying, okay, well, is what we're doing now the best we can do based upon the technology we have available to us? I've spoken to my own team in Treasurer's office already about that, and they've done a great job. They've each of them, Susan and Kim, both, they've come in and they've looked at ways in which they can streamline things, and they've looked at prior practices that can be improved upon, and they've done that. And we were talking this morning about, okay, what are the other things we can do on a go-forward basis? So that's going to be an ongoing dialogue, and that's exciting to me.
Yeah. Because I know Liz has got 14 years or more in that environment. So it's not like we have change, but it's not like we have all new people with no experience coming in. It'll be interesting to see the chosen person for Steve's replacement. And then, of course, we have town council, which now has 2 new people. I wish them all the best of luck.
Indeed.
See if we can keep those meetings down to below 4 hours. I'm sure that is. So one thing I have a question for you is, what are you going to miss the most switching jobs?
time that I spent on the town council was some of the most rewarding time that I've had in this community. And I think what I enjoyed about it, so I suppose that's probably what I'll miss about it the most, is I really enjoyed feeling as if when I was speaking or asking, I was the voice of the people that I was representing. And I spent a lot of time talking with folks about various issues. I got a lot of input and feedback from folks. And I've always said my goal was to always do the most good for the most people most of the time.
Yeah.
And if I was able to do that, then that was success. And I hope I did do that. But I also, during those meetings, thought about, if I'm the viewer, what are the questions that I'd want asked? What is it that the people I represent are wondering?
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to ask those questions.
Yeah.
And I often would hear from folks, I'm so glad you asked the questions you asked. I was wondering the same thing. Or, thank you for standing up for us and saying X or Y.
Yeah.
And, I was the vessel. I was just, I was the conduit or the go-between between the people I represented and the issue that was before the council.
Exactly.
And it's a really, it can be a daunting task because you want to make sure you're serving folks well.
Yeah.
And my agenda was making sure that the people of Wakefield were heard, making sure that the people of Wakefield had their concerns raised and their questions answered. And that was really how I saw my role. So I was probably, in retrospect, one of the more engaged town council members, probably sometimes asked too many questions. But I felt like it was the right thing to do because if not, I was doing a disservice. This isn't a role where you should just, be sitting back and just listening and moving on. It's a role where I think, it's critical questioning, critical thinking is a real important piece to it if you're doing it well. And I hope I've served the community well.
Yeah. Well, and I'm sure everybody that watches this is going to wish you well in the new position, and I'm sure you're going to bring all of that zeal to the new position. And we look forward to hearing from you later on to see what's going on as the town continues to grow and expand.
Thank you. I think the biggest concern I have is making sure that people know the pit hours going forward.
Yes,
we
will have to start making sure on that. Definitely.
I made many a video about the
Yep.
opening season for the pit and
Yep.
When those hours were, and that was at the most kind of basic or granular local municipal level that mattered to folks, and so if nothing else, I hope that we'll be able to communicate that out in an effective way.
Well, we'll have to bring you in just for that.
Fair enough. Happy to do it.
Excellent. All righty. Well, I wanted to congratulate you again.
Thank you.
And for everybody in Wakefield, we look forward to this, and hopefully we'll be talking to you again in a little bit.
And if I could just end by saying, you have a phenomenal team here, and I've seen it firsthand. For the past 8 years, when I've been coming, to these meetings and seeing the way in which you run a professional operation, and I haven't thanked WCAT enough for all that you've done. But you, as I mentioned myself, being a conduit, between the community and the issues, WCAT is that tenfold because what you deliver, you are true public servants in that you are serving the public and delivering content that is otherwise not accessible to a lot of folks, and that matters. It matters a lot, and so I thank you and your team, your predecessors, and anyone that comes into in the years to follow, because what you're doing is critically important. And,
Thank you.
And I can't stress that enough. And so I am incredibly appreciative, and I know so many others are. So just onward and upward.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you very much. We do everything that we can to make sure that everybody in this town hears about things like this so they know what's going on and they can be educated.
Indeed.
So with that, we will see everybody in Wakefield again.